Good evening. Welcome to the Southborough Library and Autumn Candidates Night. I'm Richard Walls. I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees. Trustees of the library are pleased to host Autumn Candidates Night. We believe that this event is an important part of our mission in serving the community's civic interests. Tonight you'll have an opportunity to hear from and ask questions of the 4 candidates running to fill the vacancy on the Board of Selectmen. That special election, as you probably know, is next Tuesday, November 7th. All voting will take place at the Chartier Middle School Gymnasium. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and ask my fellow trustees to stand. Jane Davis, Nicole DeBonnet, Marguerite Landry, Terry Ryan, and Amy Backus. Many of you know our library director, Ryan Donovan. I'd also like to thank former trustees James Smith and Betsy Rosenblum for their help in organizing the candidates night program. We're glad to have Southborough Access Media here tonight. They are filming the event, and that'll be available for viewing at southboroughmediaaccess.org. A brief program note: as part of our Educated Eating series, the library is hosting a holiday chocolate tasting event tomorrow night at 7. That's chocolate tasting. And this Saturday, the 4th, from 1:30 to 4:30, the Friends of the Library are holding a fill-a-bag book sale in our Ella Eaton meeting room downstairs. We are very pleased once again to have the services of former town moderator John Wilson to moderate this evening's program. Thank you all for attending, and now I'd like to turn over the program to John, and he'll explain the rules and the format. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Glad to be back here again. For those of you that don't know, I had a little throat operation a few years ago, so what you're getting for a voice is the best it's going to get tonight, but I'll do the best I can. So let me give you a summary of what the rules are tonight. First, I'd like to thank all of the library trustees, as Richard did, for setting this up, and the helpers that they have had, because it, as you can see, it makes for a very nice event. So the format is as follows. Each candidate has been invited to make a 2-minute introductory statement, and the time limits for this and everything else tonight are strictly enforced. And they're going to be enforced by Nicole DeBonnet down at the my right side. So if you have any complaints, that's where you go, to Nicole. But we'll do the best we can to stay within the guidelines. So each candidate will have 2 minutes, and then we will go to I'm sorry, I got my 2-minute introductory statements, and then the candidates from approximately 7:15 until 8 p.m. will field questions from the audience. So this is, more of a introduction of the candidates, and they'll respond to your questions. More of that than a debate per se. However, at 8 o'clock or 8:05, each candidate may ask one question of their opponents, 20 seconds to ask, and 1 minute to answer. And back on the questions from the audience, each question should be limited to the specific question without a litany of descriptions and so forth. So it's limited to 15 seconds and 1 minute of an answer. So please try to respect these limits. Now, the order of the introductory statements is being done alphabetically, and it's the same as the way the names are presented on the ballot. And just to that point, and I'll do this again later, but this is the ballot. There's only one race. It's for the Board of Selectmen position vacated by John Rooney several months ago. And this position, this particular selectman's position is until May of 2019, correct? 2019. When you ask a question, please step forward to the microphones, which are... You walk over, okay. Stand up, introduce yourself, your name, your street, direct the question to the person you wish to ask, and as I said, try to keep it to the 15 seconds. Closing statements by each candidate will also be limited to 2 minutes, and they will also be in alphabetical order in the order that's on the ballot, okay? If the program extends beyond 8:30, which is the time allotted, we need to get special permission from the trustees. And I don't know how that will play out. We'll do the best we can. Okay, any questions? Is it clear to everybody? Okay, so the first opening statement will be by Mr. Boland in the last seat down to my right. Oh, they're right behind you, I'm sorry. There's one up here. There's this one in front of Mr. Stivers, and you all have one. Okay.
And my name is Bill Boland, and I'm not growing a beard to try and look like Paul Semino. This is my annual deer hunting beard, so you can hate me if you don't like deer hunters at this point. But, my name is Bill Boland. I'm a fourth-generation resident. Many of you may know my wife, Caitlin. She works at Neary School as an aide. I have 3 children that are all graduates of Algonquin Regional High School. I have a lengthy record of public service in the town, serving as a member of the Board of Selectmen for 9 years, 3.5 years as chairman, elected currently as a commissioner of trust funds, been on the advisory committee, capital budget, master plan, zoning advisory committee, affordable housing trust fund, and other town and regional boards. I have an extensive knowledge of how town government and town meeting works. Some of the issues in town that you should ask us about, rather than us just pontificating to you, the public safety facility, the golf course and conservation restriction on it, the Main Street reconstruction project, the importance and future of our schools, keeping the town affordable for our seniors and others to stay here, the tax rate. Do we favor a single or a dual/split tax rate? Something important down the line. Open space and the town character. The future of the transfer recycling center and where we would go in a few years when that may fall apart. Development in general, Park Central and other large developments like that in town. I have a good relationship with most of the town department heads and other elected boards and committees. In my 9 years, I believe I demonstrated a strong record of voting on issues that were in the best interest of town, and I ask for your support on Tuesday, November 7th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Dorianne Jasinski.
Can we have people stand when you speak, please?
Oh, sorry.
So that people, that's right. Just
Oh, sure, do it after he says his
I stand while you speak too.
speech. Sure, no problem. That's not counting on my time, is it? Working. Good evening. Thank you to the Library Board of Trustees, Ryan Donovan, our moderator, John Wilson, and everyone here tonight. My name is Dorianne Jasinski, and I am seeking the open seat on the Board of Selectmen because I believe that through the board, I will better be able to serve my community in a more effective manner. I have proudly served this town for a volunteer for almost 24 years. I have managed and led major fundraisers for the schools, am the founder of the Southborough Education Foundation, served as chair of the scholarship committee, worked our elections as a warden, and am currently the vice chair of advisory. I have been given commendations for community service by the State Senate, the State House, the Governor, and Veterans Affairs. I've also received commendations from the U.S. Army and was awarded the Freedom Team Salute Award and the Patriotic Civilian Service Award for my work on the Troops Tribes, which I co-chaired. I was also chosen as one of the top 100 women in the state and recognized as an unsung heroine in 2011 for my community service. My life has been dedicated to my family and my town. Both of those priorities are very important to me. Through the selectman's position, my hope is to bring back a sense of unity to our town. For so long, we have had so many issues which seem to be dividing us. We all need to work together for one common purpose, our community. I am the right person for this position because I will listen and hear your voices. I have no personal or hidden agendas, no affiliations with any particular group. My sole purpose for running is to serve you, the taxpayers, and do what's best for our community. In saying that, two thoughts come to mind. First, our seniors. The seniors have meaningful contributions to the community in terms of support and taxpayer base.
20 seconds.
Consideration of the benefits from programs and services, along with facilities for this group, should be prominent as we establish the town's priorities. Helping them will only benefit all of us. Respect. We need to find respect for each other. I would like to bridge the gap. Remember, we are setting examples for future generations. Thank you.
Next is Brian Schifrin.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and library trustees, and everyone for coming and watching at home. My name is Brian Schifrin. I grew up in Townsend, Massachusetts, which is a similar-sized town on the border of New Hampshire, a similar form of government. Going back 20 years, I volunteered for many positions in that town, including chairing the planning board there. I married my lovely wife, Christine, who many of you may know, grew up in Southborough and has extended family in Southborough. I was certainly happy where I was, but she wanted to move here, so happy wife equals happy life. So 15 years ago, I moved to town. Continued my public service almost immediately from coming to town. Currently chair the Recreation Commission, where we're a very active board, constantly working to improve facilities and fields and opportunities for both kids and adults in town. Serve on the Community Preservation Commission, working on affordable housing and historic preservation. Also chair the SHOP-C Committee, again focusing on affordable housing with an emphasis on the real need for opportunities for older adults in town to remain in town that no longer need the larger homes and larger lot sizes that we have. I've also recently had the privilege of chairing the Golf Course Master Planning Committee. A great learning experience. We brought together many diverse groups there, different opinions, and really gave people a voice. And in a short period of time, which we didn't know how it was going to go when we started, but we're able to bring people together to produce something that ended up passing at town meeing, and we were able to purchase that land. So particularly proud of how that committee functioned. I've been a real estate appraiser for 15 years and an attorney that focuses on real estate matters and contract negotiation for the past 5 years. So I enjoy the public service, and now is the right time for my fresh ideas, energy, and passion. And I would thank you for your vote on November 7th. Thank you.
Next is Sam Stivers. Mr. Stivers.
Good evening. I'd echo my thanks to the sponsors of this event and to all the voters who are giving their time to learn a little bit more about us. I'm Sam Stivers, better known to many as the guy in the white shirt and the red tie in the background of all the committee meetings you see on Southborough Access TV. I attend a lot of these meetings, from the school committee to the selectmen's and everything in between. I'm also known as the guy who actually talks at many meetings about town issues. Sometimes I'm told a little more than I need to, so it's a challenge for me to finish this piece in less than 2 minutes, so I'll try here. I want to focus on 2 points tonight. One, I think I have the right skills to be an effective selectman. Second, when I take a job, I work hard to actually do the job well. For the skills, I have over 20 years of business management experience. Managing a $50 million business like the town is a very complex job. I've actually done this. I listen to all sides of an issue. I work collaboratively with folks to get jobs done. I don't have conflicts of interest. I have no access to grind with anybody about any issues. For the hard work part, I've attended over 100 committee meetings each year, because as a member of the advisory committee, I think I need to do that to understand what's going on around town. A lot of things happening and you have to stay in touch. I also work hard to understand the details related to the operation of town government. I have an example here. Nobody can see this, but this is my summer project that I did to understand how the money flows through the town. This is a one-page view of $50 million that comes from various sources, goes through the budget process, winds up at various uses here. I think you have to understand this kind of thing so you can get the big picture issues right. There are many things that come out of that are interesting to talk about, such as it's notable that we spend a very small portion of our income on things like social services, library, youth and family services, etc., and we need to take a fresh look at this. With my skills and knowledge, I'm well prepared to be an effective selectman from day one. I want to help manage our budget, and I want to help manage the costs for the spending, the projects that we have going, construction projects. I want to preserve our open space and historical beauty of Southborough, and I want to provide effective and comprehensive public services for the citizens. I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all very much. Now is the time for questions from the audience. I think the best way to do it is to line up, okay, because we're going to lose a lot of time. Is that the only microphone that we have? Yeah, so Nicole, if you pick a spot, and then the folks can line up and ask questions. I know, but we're going to lose a ton of time, okay? If they line up, I can see them. Yeah, I know what that, but, so Nicole is here. We have quite a bit of time for questions. If anybody wants to be the first, it kind of gets a little momentum. Okay, Ms. Lander.
I'm going to hold it right here. Oh, everybody can hear me okay? Okay. I'm not sure who I'm directing this to, but I'm concerned about conflict of interest. Could you, each of you speak briefly to any possible conflicts of interest that you might have with being a selectman, and should any arise, what your course of action would be?
So I wasn't expecting this as the first question to everybody, but that's fine. So let's take 30 seconds each to, I know it's a big issue. Mr. Stivers, can you go first?
Sure. Easy. No conflict of interest, and if anything should come up, I recuse myself from consideration of whatever that issue might be.
We'll go right down the line. Mr. Schifrin?
Sure. So I've been a realtor for 20 years, and that's not a plug to list your house, but just to point out that they subscribe to a code of ethics, and I've served on that ethics and arbitration panel and heard hearings for over 15 years. And as an attorney, whatever you think of attorneys, I always say one of the things, all we have really is our ethics. So I not only believe that it's not so much the actual conflict, but the perception of a conflict by the people to avoid. So I have no conflicts, and if I did, or if I thought there was even a chance of a perception of a conflict, I would be full disclosure and get it out up front.
Okay. Mr. Jasinski?
I have no conflicts of interest, and I agree with Mr. Stivers. If something were to come up, I would recuse myself.
Mr. Boland?
A conflict of interest really can only be determined when something is before you for your action, and then you would have to file with the state to determine if or not that is a conflict of interest. Usually it deals with money and an immediate relative benefiting in some way from that. An example for me would be my wife works for the school system, and if there was anything dealing with income for her, then I could not participate on that vote, and I'd have to file a conflict of interest form. She's an aide. If something was dealing with the teachers union, I could vote on that because she's not affected by that, but you still file a form according to the state.
Okay. Next question.
Hi, Howard Rose, Bantry Road. I have two questions if I can, and they are to all the candidates. One, our town seems to be in a mode of reacting to things instead of being too proactive. I'm curious of your thoughts of how you would make our town more proactive in our government and things happening in town, such as the new developments coming in, and have an ability to have the town do more of our planning rather than reacting to other things influencing that.
Okay, why don't we start this time with Mr. Schifrin?
Sure. I think it's hard when the volunteers have so much to do, which they do, but we really need to be more proactive and have more long-term strategic planning for projects and developments so that when they do arise, we have a little bit better handle on what we're doing and what the options can be. Being on that SHOPC committee, we recognize there's some potential pieces of land coming available soon. So we really should be working on those now, so we have plans so that when they do come up, similar to the Deerfoot property that's being discussed now, we know what we can do with it, and we know whether or not we want to move forward with it. So I think the short answer is we need the strategic planning ahead of time, and that will make it be much more beneficial in the future.
Mr. Jasinski?
I agree that the town needs to be more proactive. One example I can think right now would be Flag Road. Flag Road has an issue of safety on it. And in my opinion, we really need to get a working group together to take a look at what all the options are. The only option I could see myself personally would be to widen the road, to be cut down mature trees, move stone walls, and I don't think we want to ruin the scenic view of that road. So the town really needs to be more proactive. Working groups, I mean, we all work really well together as a community, and I think that that's an advantage. We have some great people here, and I think that's the way we should be going.
Mr. Boland?
When we can be proactive, we should be. The town has made attempts in the past. I served on the zoning advisory committee, which attempted to look at our zoning laws and then come up with some recommendations for potential changes. Some things like land, we can look at the 61, chapter 61 land that's available, and we should be able to try and determine which parcels are more favorable to the town. We also have to plan on how much money we have. You know, we've just spent a lot of money through community preservation, and now there's an opportunity of $1.9 million for another parcel. So if we can get people who have the time, and we have some committees to do that, to try to prioritize some of these things for when they come up, so we've got a better idea, because community preservation money for 61 land is a very short window to react to.
Mr. Stivers?
Thank you. I spent close to 20 years as a strategic planning consultant to businesses and private sector and public sector organizations. It's hard work, as my opponents here point out, but in fact I think the selectman as the chief executive of town government need to lead that process. I think there's some great examples of places where we need to get out in front of things. 40B, for example, we're relatively close to our 10% threshold for 40B. We need to find a friendly developer to actually get over that threshold. And that's something that we can do. We've got some money in the Housing Trust Fund to be able to help with that process, I think. Another thing I think is important and an issue for me is walkability in the town. In terms of things like potential pedestrian crossovers to Route 9, if we could get a couple of those. Causeway across the water, I've seen towns that have cantilevered walkways across there, and they're expensive, they're difficult, requires state funding and cooperation, etc. But if you don't have a plan and you don't have an effort to do that, it may take 10 years to do, but at least there's a hope that you can actually do those kind of things, and I think we need leadership on that kind of stuff as well. So that to me is part of the strategic planning process.
Thank you. I think to be fair to everyone else, though, you're going to have to go to the back of the line and work your way down again. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Dave Schwartz, 55 Flag Road. When towns face opportunities that require large capital expenditures, often other towns have done private partnerships to create that funding resource. What are your visions for how private partnerships can work for the town in the future? And maybe specifically mention something more about the golf course itself.
Okay, where were Mrs. Jasinski? Or was it Boland first? I'm just gonna keep.
That's a loaded question. I actually don't know what I would do with town partnerships. I know other towns actually have town partnerships with their fire departments and police departments. They share ambulances, but I'm really sorry. I don't know how to answer that question for you.
Mr. Boland?
We have some existing partnerships in town. A lot of that deals with the open space in town through Sudbury Valley Trustees, Southborough Open Land Foundation, etc. So that's a good way to try and put conservation restrictions on the land. As far as something like the golf course, a good community partner would be someone like the people running the golf course now. Most successful municipal golf courses are the management is done by an outside company that pays a fee to the town in exchange for making the profits on that. That to me is the only way we should deal with the golf course. We shouldn't try and run it ourselves as a town.
Mr. Saggers?
Just to clarify the question, I think there's a distinction between, I think it was regionalization, for example, so we might think about sharing public service dispatcher or whatever. I think there's been conversation about that. But I think the point of the question was public-private partnerships. And golf course is a good example where we've got an operator now who we could potentially hire to continue to operate the golf course. The fact that we did a longer-term lease with that operator, he might be willing to put in some capital money to put in irrigation and those kind of things. I think those are the kind of questions that we ought to address. A great example that I ran into not long ago was the town of Wellesley actually had a parcel that they owned, and they did a deal with a private recreation company that is putting in a major ice hockey facility on Route 9 on that property for like $25 million. I think they're still working on the details of it, but the town gets some lease payments off of the property. The town gets great access to a sports facility that they couldn't have afforded by themselves. They get preferential access through for town residents, et cetera, et cetera. You know, those kind of things don't come along every day, but I think you got to be open to that. And Southborough does own parcels of land around town that maybe you think about those kind of things with. So again, I think we got to keep our head up and look for those things and be prepared to follow up if we find opportunities like that.
Mr. Schifrin?
Thank you. So in recreation, we do a lot of things that are split between public and private funding. So we're able to do more for the town without solely relying on taxpayer dollars. And I think those opportunities can certainly be expanded outside of recreation and into the selectmen and for the town as a whole. An example is the sporting facilities partnerships with private clubs so that our fields and facilities can be improved for everyone. The golf course, I've been 100% behind buying the golf course land and 100% behind maintaining the golf course because maintaining that open space as a golf course is probably the most economical way to do it. Even if the course isn't financially successful by itself, it certainly would be more beneficial to keep that course than to have to maintain the open space. And I would agree, it needs to be managed by somebody else and let them reap the profits.
Okay. Next question.
Kathy Cook, 11 Greystone Way. My initial question is for Mr. Schifrin. I then would like to ask the other three candidates a related follow-up question. I tend to be a fiscal conservative when it comes to the town budget. I've seen a projected wish list from the Rec Commission as to future projects, which makes me very, very nervous. So I'd like to ask Mr. Schifrin to convince me, as the chair of the Rec Commission that is making me nervous, that he has the financial background needed to provide appropriate financial oversight to the town budget and can say no to projects when they're not financially feasible, even though they've got merit.
Mr. Schifrin?
Well, I think the goal of the Recreation Commission is to improve the facilities for adults and children in town and opportunities that they have. So we produced a long-term plan and study, and the results of that study we are working on putting together now that you referenced. And then I think it's up to the advisory and the people in town to decide whether or not those are good ideas or ideas that they want to support or not. I don't think it's our responsibility to shut those down in committee and not even give people an opportunity to see what we can do.
So I don't
Okay,
care what
so,
order.
you throw a little curveball at me with 4 questions for 1 each.
It's the same question for the next 3.
Oh, okay, well then,
So, with Mr. Zinsky and Mr. Cyber's experience on advisory and Mr. Bellin's experience on a lot of things, could you each provide a specific example where you have shown financial restraint on a budget item?
well, okay, we'll go to Mr.
Do I
Stivers.
answer that too, or?
Sure, yeah,
Sorry.
Mr.
No, I'll
Stivers.
go last.
It's kind of the same
Okay.
question,
Same
but
question.
take another shot at it. Well, go ahead, Mr. Stivers.
All right.
First.
Thank you. Example, I guess, is the most recent budget process for FY19 budget, 18 budget rather, at the recent town meeting. The initial numbers came back from the selectmen's budget with an increase that was about roughly $400,000 over the target number that advisory has set for that for the budget increase. And through efforts of the advisory members, me and others, we actually were able to talk with the selectmen, find a compromise position that reduced that $400 excess number down to a very small number that held the overall tax rate rise to under 2% for the year, which again, it seems to me is the appropriate role for advisory. We found some things that we didn't need to spend on. We found some things that we could defer a little bit, and we were able again to cut something like $350,000 out of that original proposal that I think wound up in a better position for the town.
Mr. Boland, why don't you go next?
Did you say one example of,
One specific example,
of where we said no?
where you personally exercised some type of veto to cut something in the budget that was with merit, but we didn't have the money to do it.
I would say over 9 years on the selectmen and on the advisory, it'd be hard to pick out one particular thing, because when you're working on the budget, you're always balancing the needs of the town versus capital or one department, whatever else. So there've been many difficult decisions on having to say no to an added person within youth and family services or down at the senior center, which are for me are very difficult positions. We said no to adding a new police officer several chiefs ago. So it's something that I think goes on all the time when you're a member of the selectmen and involved in the budget. One thing I said no to was keeping the selectmen's salary the same. I proposed we cut it a few years ago, and we were able to convince one union to forego their raise because we made that minor gesture.
Mrs. Jasinski.
On advisory, we had, with the budget last year, we had an instance where recreation came in and they were asking for an awful lot of lights for different fields. And one of the set of lights they needed the town to fund. It wasn't coming from CPC. And I personally voted no. I didn't think that we really needed that at that point, and we were trying to cut the budget. So I voted no on that. And then another, I think that's a good one.
Mr. Schifrin.
Yeah, so I guess my first reaction to that question is that I don't think that the no is the first option that we should have when there's things that we want to get done. The Fayetteville Playground, I'll use it as an example of something Recreation recently did. And there was it was approved for a certain amount of money, and there were some wishes and desires that were above and beyond that. And instead of just saying no, we used in-kind donation and worked with some parents that raised private funds. So a combination of public and private funding to actually get it done. So I think it's more about when you see things that need to be done, find other ways than just using the tax dollars rather than just looking to shoot something down first. But I mean, if it ultimately had to, I understand there's limits, but you should look for other ways first.
Thank you. Next question. Ms. Morrow?
Hi, Rose Morrow, 6 Winchester Street, and this is also a question about taxes, and really for anyone who wants to answer it. So I was looking at some numbers, and I know I can't compete with Sam after he flashed that diagram at us, but there's...
Quiz shortly.
Yeah, so these are numbers off the town website, and there are also some numbers that are out in the news, and there is kind of a big wild card here, which is what's happening at the federal level. And Southborough, actually, from my computations, we're kind of in the sweet spot of where we could get really slammed with, if they take away the state and local tax deduction. So my question would be, if that does happen, if it's a significant burden, would you consider tax relief for the people who would get it hit? And then corollary would be the people that might do well. If you make $800K a year, you're probably going to do well. Is there any way that those people could, maybe towards encouraging philanthropy, do you have any ideas that maybe they could make up some of the deficit?
Mr. Stivers?
Yeah, obviously hard to tell what's going to happen at the federal level, and it's probably going to take a while to sort out. But I think that there is limited amount of things that the town can do to actually absorb some of those hits in terms of the overall tax structure. For example, we control the property tax rate, so we can, for example, think about potentially creating credits or something to rebalance some of that load potentially. That's a touchy one from a political standpoint. You'd have to get town meeting to support that, for example, I think. Other terms of, you mentioned philanthropy. I think we fortunately have a number of very wonderful organizations, the Friends groups around town, that actually provide a source of funding for exceptional needs. Friends of the Library, Friends of Recreation, et cetera, et cetera. I think that the town could certainly work to encourage people to be more generous toward those organizations as well. But from a tax policy standpoint, the town has fairly limited ability to control what happens at the federal level and the state level that trickles down to individual taxpayers in Southborough.
Okay, time is up. Mr. Schifrin?
So I wouldn't be in favor of disproportionately somehow taxing people, if that's what you're asking. But I have long been working on, through SHOPC and other committees that I've served on, ways to give opportunities to seniors and those that are less fortunate to have housing opportunities in town. And I think that continues with, if tax issues came up or whatever. It's just the overall importance that we need to have an economically diverse community to be successful. And that's one of the things that the town is built on, and that's a successful base for the future, and it's important. So I would certainly work with whatever groups were being harmed and want to help whatever we could do to keep people in town and give people opportunities to stay in town. But I don't think a disproportionate real estate tax is the way to do that.
Okay, Mrs. Jasinski?
I don't think there's anything we can do at the town level either regarding taxes. We can give help to people like we do with the seniors right now. When the burden is too high, we give them hours working at the town clerk's office or the treasurer's office. Other than that, I don't know what we can really do to help ease the burden, and I don't believe that taxing one group more than another group is the way to go either. We have some very generous people in town. Fundraising might be a way to help. I'm not really sure other than that.
Mr. Boland?
Legally, there's not a lot of things you can do unless the state allows you to do it with taxes. We do have some programs where veterans get a certain break, where you're able to defer your property taxes at a certain income level until you sell the house. That's a program that you can talk to the assessors about. I believe the interest rate is 4% on that. It is available, but again, I believe there's an income level that you have to be below. But the other thing that probably no one wants to talk about is if you can't fund your tax rate in town, then you have to cut services. And it's up for the selectmen and the advisory committee and others to determine then which services will be reduced so you can have a lower tax rate.
Okay, we're back to Mr. Green.
Mr. Rose, thank you. Harold Rose Bantry. Mr. Jasinski, thank you for bringing it up. My question is actually about safety, particularly about Flag Road. There is a whole section of town that is extremely concerned that what will happen safety-wise if Park Central should go through. I'm not going to ask you about Park Central because it's well past that point where you'll have anything to do about it. But should Park Central go through, I'd like to know from each one of you. There was a motion before to block Flag Road for the safety of the residents and keep our town and our current residents and our future residents safe. So I'm wondering where you stand on that, and would you support doing that to support our safety, or do you have other plans?
Mr. Schifrin.
I think the process surrounding Park Central from the beginning was very unfortunate. The Flag Road safety issue, I think the Board of Selectmen have a responsibility to all the citizens in the community, the developer, the neighbors, everyone in the community there. And the safety on the roads is near the top of that priority in that area. So when it does shake out from court, whatever does happen in that area, if the developer, if it's not a priority for them to have safety in that area, then the Board of Selectmen have to step in and do whatever they can to provide that safety for not only the people in that development, but the neighbors and the community as a whole.
Mrs. Jasinski.
I personally am very concerned about the Flag Road safety issue. And I'm not going to comment on Park Central because it is in litigation. But that's why I said we need to be proactive. And we need to take a very serious look at how the safety of that impacts all of the neighbors in that area. And what are the possibilities that Park Central is going to impact that? We know there's going to be a pretty significant impact if it goes through. So we need to get a working group together, and we need to study and look very hard at the safety, because there are a lot of children in that area, and that's why I brought it up, because that's one of the things I'm very concerned about in town.
Mr. Boland.
I'm concerned about the safety on all of our streets. You know, we live in a historic town. We have narrow roads. We have stone walls that have been in existence for hundreds of years, and they kind of limit what you can do on some of those streets. One of our largest problems with traffic is we all drive too fast. We might be slow through our own neighborhood, but we go too fast. When the town had done studies on different streets where people were complaining about the speed, over 50% of the people that were stopped lived on that street or one of the tributaries to those streets. You know, we need to slow down. We need to look at all of our streets, Lover's Lane, Breakneck Hill, some of the other streets, Sears Road. There's a lot of towns, roads that are very narrow and get a lot of traffic, and we need to look at all of them and try to make them safer.
Mr. Stavers.
I'll answer your question directly, Mr. Rose. I'm in favor of closing Flag Road at the end if that turns out to be the only alternative that we need to use to protect the public safety. I've followed this project closely for a number of years now, and I certainly don't see any other obvious solution to the public safety issue. It would be unfortunate for many reasons to have to close Flag Road at the end, but if necessary to protect public safety, I'd be in favor of that.
Thank you. And by the way, no one here has actually thanked everyone up here for your service so far and continuing, so thank you.
Mrs. Reynolds.
Thank you. Claire Reynolds, 104 Main Street. This question is directed to Mr. Schifrin. My question is regarding recreation. There are several projects that are underfoot, planned projects and whatever. The Choate Field Lights is the big one now. As a taxpayer, can you tell me why these projects are having some of these issues or overruns, and what could be done to avoid that in the future? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for bringing that up. I'm proud of all of the projects that Recreation has been able to move forward over the past few years. It's a very active committee, and they're working hard to meet their mission every day, and I'm proud of that, and everyone on that committee. The Chokefield Lights was a big project, and when it is completed, it's going to be one of the better fields in town. It's one of the most used fields in town, and that will just increase once they're done. The current state is at a little bit of a stall only because of a design flaw in the beginning of the process by an electrical engineer, to put it simple. So it's unfortunate, and it has cost us some time, but through our work with the installers and the people that are working on the project, it's not costing the town any more money because of the delay. We're just using some, it's just frustrating to see them up and not be able to use them. But there is a plan in place.
Just a couple of seconds.
Yep, there is a plan in place. Again, it won't cost us any more, and they should be on soon. Thank you.
Okay, that question was directed to Mr. Schifrin. Does anybody else have a comment? I mean, that was a recreation question. No comments? Yes, sir.
Hi, Mike Elflin, 26 Latticequama. I'm in a butter to the golf course. Surprised no one's talked about that. That means things are going great, and that's why I'm here. Things are going great. As in a butter, I love the direction it's going. So all that's left is to make sure the train stays on the right track. The conservation restriction, perfect. Gonna protect everything but the land for the building. Does anyone here, if elected, would anyone here tweak, delete, amend the conservation restriction?
Let's see. Well, that's to, would anybody, yeah, Mrs. Jasinski.
The conservation restriction is not complete at this point, but I would not take it off of that land. I would definitely keep it there to protect it. I believe that we don't want that land developed either. I know the neighbors don't, and that is a focal point in town, and it's a very beautiful area, and I would want to keep the open space there. I'm a big supporter of open space, so I would leave it.
Okay, Mr. Boland?
Kind of the same thing. The conservation restriction is not complete yet. I wouldn't be in favor of removing a conservation restriction from that land. I'd have to see what the conservation restriction, where it was going, in order to react to if there was something I felt should be included in the use, or that should be deleted from what's proposed there now. I have a concern.
That's a yes?
A yes to?
That you wouldn't tweak, amend, delete?
But potentially, depending on what the final product looks like. You know, I think everybody should be participating in trying to come to that final product now. Yeah.
Mr. Stivers?
Yeah, turns out I was actually involved in the drafting of that CR, and a lot of thought went into it, and I'm pretty happy with it. I'm certainly willing to think about other possibilities there, but I thought it was a pretty good one, and again, my goal is to preserve the property and make it available to town residents going forward in ways that maximize their use from it, and golf is a key part of that process, so I think it needs to be tight and carefully monitored. Thank you.
So you would keep it as open space?
Certainly, absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Schifrin?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I too was involved in the process for the purchasing of the land and putting a conservation restriction on it. So through that process, I came to really appreciate what that land means to the town and how magnificent it is. So 100%, it needs to be maintained as open space. And I think the best way to do that, the most economical way, is to have a running golf course on that land. So whatever I could do to help that, I would do, and certainly would not change the conservation restriction or remove it in any way that would allow that parcel to be further developed.
Thank you, and I'd also like to thank the cable people for getting these responses on the record. Thank you.
Mr. Shimkus? Yes.
Karen Hillen-Chimkus, Limerick Road. This is an accountability, transparency in government, policy process, and procedural remedies question with regard to ethics. State Ethics 268A, conflict of interest. Prohibits self-dealing and nepotism, you and your immediate family, your business partners, any business organization which you serve, future employers. I'll give a ridiculous example, just by way of example.
We're trying to limit the questions
Sure.
to 15 seconds.
An attorney who might head a board or commission whose company or partners are dealing directly or profiting from doing business with a developer who appears regularly before town. That would be a ridiculous example, but yes or no, have you ever been admonished by the Attorney General's office or the State Ethics Commission or any other licensing board or agency? Yes or no, would you be in favor of some kind of form or certification for anyone taking public
So we're gonna-
office?
Mrs. Shimkus, we have to wrap up the question. Some of these things.
And
were addressed
third-party
earlier.
oversight, impartiality, someone who would oversee. I'm wondering what policy recommendations and changes you would make.
Okay,
Yes.
that's good, thank you. Mr. Boland?
Not sure I followed it all, but I know the conflict of interest laws. I know open meeting laws. I've been accused of violating them. There was one instance, I believe, I never saw the final ruling from the Attorney General. It was after I was no longer on the board, where they said selectmen colluded by talking outside a meeting on something that had already been out in the public, and their initial finding was that we violated the open meeting law. I didn't agree with that, but I don't know if it was ever appealed or not. So potentially the answer to that is yes, for violating the open meeting law.
Mr. Stivers?
Never been cited for violation of any of those regulations. I think that given, again, public perception around these issues, I think the town could actually do a more thorough job of vetting candidates for appointments to boards to make sure that there aren't appearances of conflict of interest
Precisely.
before people are appointed. So,
Precisely.
yeah, that makes sense.
Mr. Schifrin?
So, as I stated earlier, I have a very high sensitivity to ethical issues and conflict of interest. I'm very familiar with the law. I've been in public service chairing committees for over 20 years and have never been accused of an open meeting law violation. I serve in town and I'm also a local attorney. I have turned down clients because of my positions on boards where I can't represent them. And for full disclosure, the appraisal licensing board, 10 years ago, I paid a fine for missing continuing education. So.
Mrs. Jasinski?
I have never had an ethics violation, an open meeting law violation. I have never had a conflict of interest. I have a very high level of integrity and personal values, and I would never violate my own personal ideals. So I've never had an issue.
What would you do to bridge gaps or lapses on obvious?
Okay, we have to move with this one question at a time, and then you have to go back to the end of the line. Yes, sir.
Go ahead, buddy.
Hi, Matt Brownell, 8 Jacobs Lane. I'm going to throw a question, I guess, out to the four of you. I'd like to know your thoughts and opinions about the effectiveness, the current effectiveness and inclusiveness of the annual town meeting, and whether you would suggest any improvements in that process. I ask this because on any given night, there are maybe 3% of Southborough's total population there to vote on the warrants. So, trying to figure out if there's been any thought given to electronic voting on the warrants. I'm kind of curious to see what other towns may have done.
Mr. Savage?
Good question. I think that 3% is actually a high estimate, sadly, as a matter of fact. I think that there are actually efforts underway. There's a town meeting review committee that has been working and made some recommendations, which I think many of which are very attractive. I think that the town clerk has been doing a lot of good work in terms of trying to accelerate the process. I'm certainly in favor of doing whatever we reasonably can to substantially increase participation, because I think it's a great opportunity for people to figure out, to have an opinion on how they're spending their own money. And I think that many towns are doing electronic things. Electronic voting speeds things up. Some towns have a fall town meeting for procedural kind of things, and a spring town meeting for budget, for example. Might consider that. Saturdays, some towns use, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm certainly open to a variety of means to boost participation. Thank you.
Mr. Schifrin.
So I certainly have enjoyed the last few town meetings with you there, and I think every night that I'm there, as much as I'm proud of the process, and I'm glad we're able to do it, I think I'm always saying in the back of my head that there has to be a better way to do it, and get more people involved and have it be more efficient. But at the same time, that inclusiveness and thoroughness kind of, it almost may require your presence. I don't know. I have had the, since you asked, I have had the conversations with our clerk about whether or not, electronic voting is even possible or allowable. So if it is, I mean, I certainly would be open to that. But you also want people there to be able to participate too. So it'd be a trade-off. Thank you.
Mrs. Jasinski.
I have been very disappointed at the turnout for town meetings, but the challenge of getting people there on a weeknight, knowing what's ahead of them, having to sit there for 3-4 hours, 11 o'clock at night, having to come back a second night, and what we just experienced coming back a third night is a very difficult task. And I know, hats off to our town clerk, Jim, who has done an outstanding job. He is working to get more advertising, trying to get the people in. But I don't know how to get people to come. I don't know why they don't want to vote on how we're spending their money, but I have no problem spending their money if they don't want to come and help us.
Mr. Bowler.
I'm a big believer in annual town meeting for a town the size of Southborough. I've probably attended since I was about 16 when they had it at the old Woodard School. I'd like to see more people come. I've seen towns try a Saturday session to begin with. They usually end up with about the same participation because those that can't come because of babysitting issues or getting out of town late from work or other things have sports obligations on Saturday morning. So the research I've shown, and I know the group is doing it right now, it really doesn't help. The only way you get more people out is if there's something that the people are really interested in. Electronic voting, Westboro rents devices to be able to vote, but only from the confines of the hall. Something would have to be changed in the form of government to be able to vote from home or to change how a town meeting works.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead, you can step aside, Mr. Shimkus. We have about 7 or 8 minutes left until we turn to the part of the program where the candidates ask each other a question. So the two people that are up there now and the responses will use up all of that time. And then we can turn to the next part. So, well, you're gonna have to get.
Do I have to move over there?
Yes.
Just hold on.
Okay. Yeah, you do. Well, I'll give you. Okay. Why don't you move over there?
I have to move over? But this is
Have my mic.
Well, they were.
for all these people who can't even come to town. I have to walk.
Well, now go to the two questions over here first, and then stay right there. Yours will be the last question. Okay? And we'll hand you the microphone.
Back to state ethics. And a concern about basic competency of the people who sit on the boards, having been to many, many, many meetings and witnessed what I perceive to be alleged violations of the law. Would you be in favor of an impartial third-party oversight. For instance, everyone has to take state ethics once a year. So they certainly are familiar with state ethics rules. But you have individuals who, there can be some problems that can arise. Would you be in favor, yes or no, of an impartial third-party oversight once a year? For instance, when they take state ethics course, they have to sign a certification saying that their firm has not profited from doing business with anyone who has business in front of the town. Little better scrutiny or annual scrutiny of potential conflicts.
Mr. Schiffer.
Again, I have a high sensitivity to that conflict of interest issue. I would like to think that anyone on any of our boards, including the Board of Selectmen, would not be personally or their firm profiting from something in which they were involved as a committee. In terms of additional oversight and signing off on something, I'm not opposed to the idea, but I think that the process would need to be vetted somehow. I'm not sure that I've heard of a town that's doing that. So I'm not sure if it's legally possible or if it's in the best interest of the volunteers to do that. So I would certainly want it vetted, but I'm not opposed to the idea.
Mrs. Jasinski.
I'm actually not opposed to the idea, but how effective is that going to be? And I wouldn't know how effective that's going to be. And is it just going to be more paperwork and more rhetoric, more problems? I don't know if it's going to be very effective, so I don't know if it'll really do anything.
It's certainly worth asking.
Mr. Boland.
I guess my answer is no. I'm not in favor of involving a third party to determine if someone is in ethical violation or not. People have to go through a training session. I'm in favor of providing whatever training additionally that the town can provide. But your word of perceived is something which would require somebody to file a conflict of interest form if there is a perception that there might be a conflict of interest. Emphasis on perception. That does not mean that there is a conflict of interest. It does not mean that they can't participate. They just have to inform people what might cause a perceived conflict of interest. And again, it doesn't mean that there is a conflict of interest, and I'm not in favor of somebody else determining that.
Okay, Mrs. Barrett. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Accept my apology.
No problem. I think that the town actually could do a better job internally, a more thorough job of vetting people when they're appointed and then reinforcing that issue around the training process. So I would not go to third party as a first step, only if the town tried to do something there and was not able to actually get satisfaction on that process. I think it's a critical thing to continue to reinforce, but I would prefer to try it internally first.
Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Barrett.
Louise Barron, Sadie Hut Lane. We have a very, very large project in this town, the municipal building. I personally would like to see accountability and oversight so we know that the funds are going where the funds are supposed to be. There are towns and there are funds sometimes that just sort of disappear or fall into the wrong hands. A forensic auditor, I think, would be an excellent idea periodically, so that we know our monies are going where our money is supposed to go regarding this building.
So, Mrs. Jasinski.
It is a question, yes,
Is
to the
that-
candidates.
Can you put a question? Yeah, okay.
I'm sorry. How would you consider, what would you consider as an auditor or safeguarding the funds that we will be using for building the building?
Mrs. Jasinski.
Well, right now, we have the Public Safety Building Committee, and they have hired the architect, And they are looking at contracts, and the money's paid through by the treasurer, I believe. And so Brian Ballantyne is watching our money, and he's getting the bills, and I have complete faith and trust in him monitoring that. And if there's any issues, I'm sure he'll see them. I don't think we need oversight on that. I have complete faith in Brian. I trust Brian. So if he sees something funny, I'm sure he'll call attention to it.
Mr. Boland.
We do need to have a project manager on any construction project of this nature. They work for the town. They're eyes and ears. If that person is acting inappropriately, then usually they have a bond and you go after that person. It's up to the committee as the primary people to look at that. It's up to the selectmen who would be overseeing that committee to make sure that everything is going appropriately. You also have to, when you award the contract to the company that builds the building, make sure that they haven't had any problems in the past. There's several of these facilities that have come out very recently that have been below budget, ahead of schedule, etc. So you have to hold their feet to the fire, if you will, and make sure that they're doing the job and doing it well on time.
Mr. Stivers.
This is an interesting project. I think that if there were only one or two people or entities involved in managing it, I think we'd be at higher risk than we are. We actually are hiring an OPM, they call it Owner's Project Manager, who watches things. The architect watches things, and as Mr. Jasinski says, our treasurer watches things. I was at a workshop a couple of weekends ago where I learned about a state program through the Division of Local Services, I think it is, that actually sends in a consulting team to do a review of financial management practices in towns. It doesn't cost the town anything. This might be an interesting opportunity to have them come in as the project is rolling along and take a look at the whole picture and see if they see any places where money could be leaking or not being managed properly, etc. So that could be an extra layer of safety. If there's a problem, then you hire a forensic auditor to come look. Thank you.
Mr. Schifrin.
So I too have ample experience working with Brian and the town administrator, and would agree that they have good processes in place to protect our money. But given the size and scope of that project, and the fact that as a town, the staff, the boards have not done a project like that recently or ever of that size, I think that some type of third-party oversight to make sure things are done properly may be a good idea. It's probably something for the Board of Selectmen to discuss and see if it's necessary. But given the fact that just a couple percent here or there could really add up, I think that would make sense to have some sort of independent oversight.
Okay, Mrs. McDaniel. This is the final question, and then we're going to go to the candidates questioning each other.
I have a question. I actually wasn't thinking of it when I came in, but it occurred to me while I'm here. And I realize it's not a matter of maybe wide interest to everybody. It applies to everybody, but it should be wide interest. And that is, I want to ask the selectmen if they would be willing to look at the question of affordable housing. Now that I don't remember, well, I've lived in affordable housing for 20 years or something. We changed the zoning bylaw. We allowed several different cluster zoning, duplexes, etc. The idea was that you have people in town who maybe at a certain point in their life couldn't pay for a nice big house. They didn't want to take care of it, so there was some place a little more reasonable for them to live. I live in Southborough Meadows. I think I'm the only person from Southborough now who lives there, and I think there have only been a couple of others along the way. So that concerns me.
So let me just interrupt. I know you came in after I explained the rules, so the questioner only has 15 seconds to ask a question. So we'll start over, but starting now.
Well, my question is, would the selectmen be interested enough in that issue, or anybody else who would like to pursue it? Because we have affordable housing that really isn't in anybody's, at least not my view of affordable. Carriage Hill is one example.
Okay, Mr. Baldwin. Affordable housing.
Yes, I'd love to see some type of housing targeted towards seniors who can be 60, 65 years old now, the new 40. But it's hard for people to downsize, sell their house, and then take out a mortgage on their new downsized house. With a buildable lot going for $250,000 in town, it's difficult. So we need to try and find a way to work with some builders, whether using affordable housing money, which exists, or some other way through concessions, but to not have an over 55 that the units are going for $800,000. We need to try and keep our seniors in town and find some way to do something like that. One of them could be I'll say Willows type of project, where you have something where you over various stages of the rest of your life stay on that facility, but we need to do something.
Mr. Stivers.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that one. If you actually look at my website, which is www.samforselectmen.com, you'll see that affordable housing is an issue. I think it's broader, Ms. McDaniel, than the seniors. I think there's an issue for seniors and there's an issue for young families wanting to move into town. I think it's tied to our zoning code, which is not very friendly for that. I think it actually started out as trying to do that a number of years ago, but times have changed, and so the effect has been basically minimal in terms of that. I think, it's my understanding, we've got like $700,000 or so in our housing trust funds now that we can actually use to do some of those things. So I think we got to get moving, do things there, get some projects working that I think the selectmen can provide some leadership on, and I'd like to try to do that. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Schifrin.
Thank you. I think through my work on SHOPC and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and community preservation, to say that I'm interested in affordable housing would be an understatement. It has been one of my priorities over the past few years, and constantly looking to identify opportunities to pursue affordable housing. I know where the money is. I know that if we can just get those parcels and get a good plan, we can start to see some of those things produced and make some changes that we will be able to produce them. I think every opportunity I get with any piece of land or any project that comes up, I'm constantly asking if we can, have a portion of it for affordable housing, or if this is a good spot to try to do something. When I see parcels available on the main streets with real estate signs, I'm constantly looking for those opportunities, and I know that soon we will be able to do that. Thank you.
Mrs. Jasinski.
I actually agree with Mr. Stivers that there actually are two groups that need the affordable housing, the young families and the seniors. And I agree with Ms. McDaniels that the pricing is out of control. It's crazy. And we need to help to bring the cost down, but we definitely need affordable housing that we can assist both of those groups with.
Okay, thank you. So before we go to the question and answer of the candidates, I'd like to just mention again that this is the specimen ballot. I assume most of you that have taken the time to come here tonight will go to the polls next Tuesday between the hours of 6:30 a.m. and 8 p.m. at the Trotter School. And Mr. Town Clerk, if you have anything you want to add to that, this is your opportunity.
Look forward to seeing you.
Okay, so now, I don't have a particular order for this, but each candidate may ask one question of their opponents, of all of their opponents. So let me flip a coin up here, and I'll ask Mr. Stivers to start off.
Interesting opportunity. From what I've heard tonight, people are asking us questions to learn about our positions on town issues, and sometimes to try to put a little pressure on us about specific issues. I actually respect all of my opponents here. I know them pretty well, served with them in a variety of capacities. I'm not interested in criticizing them. That's not the campaign that I want to run. And relative to the issues, I actually thoroughly understand all the issue positions of the candidate that I'm going to be voting for. So I don't need to ask anyone about their positions. I'll therefore pass on the question.
I'll go right down the line again. Mr. Schifrin.
So similar to that, I don't necessarily have a question, but just want to emphasize that I've had opportunity to serve on many committees over the past few years in town. And as part of that, have worked with a lot of different groups, volunteers, community, staff, to bring a lot of warrant articles, ideas forward at town meeting that have ultimately been approved and have either been done or are in process. And I'm really proud of the way that I'm able to work with all of those groups to get things done. So I guess highlighting that, I would just pass my time to the rest of the committee up here to kind of share their thoughts on either working with people to get things through town meeting if they've done that before, or their history doing that with successful projects. Thank you.
Mrs. Jasinski.
Okay, I'm doing this again. I'm agreeing with Mr. Stivers, and I came into this event tonight pretty torn how I wanted to handle this and respond. That I'm running on a campaign of unity and togetherness, and we have so many issues dividing our town right now. And to me, I respect so much these three gentlemen that I am running with for this position for a year and a half. And I just don't feel it was the right thing to do to put any of them on the spot, to try to either corner them or make them uncomfortable. So I am not going to ask a question either, out of respect for these three gentlemen.
Mr. Boland.
When I read the new agenda, I took it to be one question of only one candidate, so I must have read that wrong, and I had no desire to point out to one candidate, what would you do about this? But I think maybe for the audience, I would ask the people to let the people in the audience know if there's one thing that you could change about town government, what would you try to change?
That's to your three opponents, Mr. Stivers.
I guess if I could wave a magic wand, the thing that's most important to me is participation. I grew up in a world that didn't have open town meeting, and when I moved to Massachusetts 40 years ago, one of the things that really impressed me was the ability to actually feel like you could have an impact on the local level. I think many of us have gotten a little disillusioned about having an impact on the state and federal level at this point, but I think it's a real privilege to be able to go to town meeting and determine what your bylaws are going to be, determine how you're going to spend your own money on the local level. And I think that it's a sad fact that we don't get participation nearly as high as it should be, and I think that I'd love to see a way to be able to boost that by a factor of 2 or 3 or 4 over what we see now.
Mr. Schifrin.
I think inclusiveness is important, and a better communication and working relationships between the boards and the volunteers that we have. I think there's been some, I guess, butting heads would be the best way to put it, over the past couple of years, and threats of lawsuits between one board and another. And I think in a town like Southborough that to get to that point is a little unfortunate. So I would just like to see, and I think it goes top down, so it has to come from the selectmen, that the boards just need to work better together to serve the people.
Mrs. Jasinski.
Respect. We need to learn to respect each other better. There's too much fighting, inner fighting with committees, commissions, boards. There's disrespect shown to the public. There's disrespect shown to each other on the boards. We are a community. We should be unified. We shouldn't be fighting amongst ourselves. We should be working together for the best for this town. We have so much that we can do to benefit everybody, and I think we should start working together better.
Mr. Boland.
I echo some of the sentiment. I'd like to see more participation. I don't have any problem with people disagreeing with opinions of boards, of committees, of other people. I think it's healthy conversation. We all, at one time or another, or in the future, will have something built in our backyard. It's, unless you're landlocked now, it happened to me a couple of years ago, and we have to try to work to make that work to the town and work to our best interests, without insulting everybody, without suing each other and doing things like that. We need to go to town meeting, we need to vote on these issues, and we need to participate as much as possible. TV is great for, you know, not being able to go to meetings, and if it's a televised meeting such as this, be able to watch it later. And I think we should all try to make a little time to learn a little about the people that are serving you and try to respect them. It's okay to disagree with them, but let's understand they're working for all of us, usually as volunteers, and trying to make it a better town. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. So we now have the closing statements of 2 minutes each of the candidates. And right now we're right on time. So we're going to start at that end of the table. Come this way. Mr. Boland.
Are we going to stand this time?
Yes.
Stand up.
You are. We're going to sit.
This is the closing one?
Well, I can go to someone else.
There you go. You can go in the reverse order.
Would you like to read mine?
Yeah. I'd like you all to visit my website, www.don'tvoteforsam.com. No, see, seriously, there's 4 people here who have a great desire and have served the town, and I hope you'll give all of them your consideration and pick who you think will best represent your views of how the town should go. Closing, I believe my experience and knowledge makes me the most qualified to serve you on the Board of Selectmen. I know how municipal and state governments work. I've served on many local boards. I was on the executive board of the Metro West Regional Collaborative, representative to the Worcester County Selectmen's Association, working with selectmen and planning reps from a lot of different towns in the surrounding area. So I have very good knowledge of the towns around us, how they operate and their people. I've worked closely with our local legislatures over the years. Representative Dykema has done a great job for the town. Senator Eldridge as well is always there when we need them. I know many other state reps and people in government, and I'm a personal friend of Governor Baker's Secretary of the Executive Office for Administration and Finance. I've participated in hiring many of our current department heads, participated in collective bargaining with town units, negotiated contracts with department heads and state agencies. I have an extensive knowledge of town meeting and how it works and the history of the town and why some things are done the way they're done. When serving on a board, I'm a team member. I participate in active discussion, presenting views that I believe are in the best interest of town, or that have been dictated to me from some of you people. Whatever it is, when the matter is decided, if I'm on the prevailing side of the decision, I support the position of the board and move forward. I don't try to then get my way in a roundabout way.
5 seconds.
That's in the best interest. I'll listen to your thoughts and ideas, however, will not always agree with you, but I will give you the opportunity to convince me, and I'll strive to keep communications open and frequent between the boards, citizens, and everyone who has the ability and knowledge to be involved in town affairs. Thank you.
As a resident of our town for almost 24 years, I have seen a great deal of development and positive growth in our community. This development and growth has also stressed resources and caused some conflicts as we consider options. It has also expanded our need for investing to maintain our environment, to have high-quality playing fields, to support our schools, and for our town facilities and community centers. The Board of Selectmen must consider the diversity of our town, must seek to provide complete transparency in our decision-making process, and must respectfully listen to all groups as we make our decisions. As a selectman, I will bring enthusiasm, energy, and respect for others to the role. I will bring more diversity to the viewpoints of the committee. I will seek input from the community, our town committees, appropriate experts, and our town officials as we consider any proposals, as these proposals move to the decision points. I will work to build a consensus through my relationships with a broad range of groups in the community. This is a wonderful community, and we must support our seniors, our recreational community, our environment, and our culture of being Southborough. We have the means and the capacity to achieve these goals and do them in a timely and an affordable manner. We can also maintain the charm of a small town while pursuing projects that beautify our town and protect our environment. I offer the town a centrist, collaborative, and more diverse mindset as a long-term resident, but provide a new voice for the selectmen. I am asking for your vote on Tuesday, November 7th. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Mr. Schifrin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and trustees, and thank you everyone for coming and the questions for all of us. Again, I'm 100% committed to all of the positions that I've held in town. I think the roles and the responsibility is critical, and this is one of the highest positions in town, and very important for the future of the town. I have a lot of family and 2 young kids in the Southborough schools, and am invested in the success of the selectmen and the town as a whole. My recent experiences working on committees have taught me how this inclusive form of government, giving people a voice, getting people together, will yield good results. You're not going to like every decision I make, most certainly, but you won't be able to fault the process that I will take us through, whatever the issue may be. Time is limited. We're all volunteers. I have a passion and a lot of energy for this position, and I look forward to the opportunity. So I thank you for your vote on November 7th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson, and thanks again to all for coming and participating. I appreciated the opportunity to speak with you tonight. We've heard a lot about issues and what the candidates think about the issues. When it comes time to decide how people are going to vote, nobody now can know all the issues that are going to come in front of the selectmen going forward. So this is helpful, but it doesn't really tell voters, I think, everything they need to know about who you choose. And ultimately, I think everybody needs to ask when they get in the voting booth, who can I trust to do a fair, thoughtful, skillful job to deal with whatever issues come before the selectmen? If you take a look at the supporters listed on my website, there are about 40 people who are on there who actually have said, I've either worked with Sam, I've seen Sam working as a town volunteer. These are sort of what I think of as my job application references. These are people who know what it takes to do an effective job in town government. They've seen me work in that environment, and their endorsement of me is basically saying they're willing to place their trust and confidence in me to do the job right as a selectman. And I'm proud to have earned that trust. I'll work hard to continue to deserve this trust from my endorsers and from all citizens in Southborough. I'd add a couple of small sidebar points. One is that Mr. Wilson showing the ballot reminded me of a potential campaign slogan, last on the ballot, but I hope first in your hearts. Second, if there actually is anybody who's interested in seeing the busy chart here, $50 million on one piece of paper, I'm happy to stick around and talk about it. I'm actually going to bring it to the transfer station Saturday. I'm holding my Vote for Sam sign out here, so I'll be happy to talk about it then as well. I appreciate your interest in this process. I ask for your vote on November 7th. Thank you.
Okay, so that concludes this part of the evening. I didn't know if Mr. Wallace had any closing comment, but I'd like to thank all of you for coming out. It does my heart good to see the room filled with people interested in the town.
Thank you, John, and the candidates for coming out, and everyone for attending. And we'll be here. The library closes at 9, but you're welcome to stay and talk with the candidates until then. So thank you.